I just filmed this entire video and realized that my camera wasn't on. In 1755, the Eddystone Lighthouse off the coast of Cornwall, England, became the site of one of the most bizarre deaths and defiances of death I've ever heard. Sorry guys if my eyes are red or I look particularly sickly, but I feel my allergies have me feeling like I just chiefed a hantavirus geek bar. So I first found this story while working on a short story of mine called The Labyrinth, which you need to read because it's on my Substack. It'll be linked, it'll be everywhere. And I would really like if you read it. Basically the story is I realized while I was writing that the 7 planetary metals in alchemy are present inside a lighthouse. And you have, for example, the iron of the big mechanism that turns the lighthouse. You have the mercury that the turning mechanism floats on top of. You have the silver of the lantern. You have the tin of the kerosene cans. You have the copper in the Fresnel lenses. And finally, there is the gold of the light from the lighthouse. So all that left was lead. And I was like, where would lead be in all of this? I was like, man, I'm so close. They're all there, except lead. So I had to look up lead in a lighthouse. And I found out that lighthouse roofs, the very tippy top, up there, those beams, going across, a lot of times were made of lead. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting and also very odd. And this quickly led me to the story I'm about to recall.
You don't like me cooking? Oh, don't be such an old bitch!
The Eddystones are a showery, The Eddystone rocks are a shallowly submerged rock formation about 14 kilometers from land in the English Channel. They're called the Eddystones because eddy is a circular current of water that goes like. If you need a visual reference, go to the bathroom right now and flush the toilet. And then if you're in Australia, it'll go the other way. The Simpsons taught me that. Don't ever tell you that the TV didn't tell you nothing. They're named the Eddystones due to the eddies, which are circular currents of water that surround rocks, and these rocks in the stone part of Eddystone are razor sharp rocks. Finally got all that out. Okay, time to get into the actual video. And thank you for watching. These rocks are also swept by enormous waves large enough to swallow boats whole. The Eddystone was dreaded by sailors and could easily sink wooden ships of the era. To make it even worse, it wasn't as simple as just avoiding the area. The Eddystone rocks were near Plymouth Sound, which held one of the British's most important naval harbors. Now, luckily in the spring, the tide tends to make the Eddystones visible, and construction began on the first lighthouse in 1696 by Henry Winstanley, who was an eccentric architect and maritime investor. He was inspired to attempt the lighthouse construction after 2 ships he had invested in were sunk by the Eddystones in the same year. He was given permission to start building by the Britain's Office of Navigational Aid at Trinity House, but they had very little hope in him. It was thought that building a lighthouse on the Eddystone was impossible due to the rough surf, but Winstanley was carelessly overconfident, not fully understanding how much of an endeavor it would be. However, after many challenges, the lighthouse was eventually finished after only 3 years. The Winstanley Tower, as it was called, was a wooden octagonal design, and from every drawing I've seen of it, the tower looks something straight out of Dr. Seuss. However strange it may have looked, the tower was lit on November 14th, 1698, making it the first lighthouse on the Eddystone. I thought this little side note was interesting, but during the construction, the British and the French were at war. In other news, the sky is still blue. During this time, the British Admiralty took the building of the lighthouse very seriously. So a warship protected the lighthouse on the days construction was taking place. One morning in late June, Henry Winstanley waited for the warship to come over the horizon, but it never came. Instead, a French privateer vessel approached the unfinished lighthouse. A privateer, for those of you who don't know, is basically a pirate that works for the government. It sounds really antithetical, but I don't know, government be backwards. The French privateers destroyed much of the lighthouse and took Winstanley prisoner. So Winstanley was brought all the way back to France by the privateers, and they presented him before King Louis XIV. So we're not really sure why the privateers thought that the king would want to see Winstanley, but they brought him, and the king was pissed. He was furious at the destruction of the lighthouse and ordered that Winstanley to be returned immediately, stating that France is at war with England, not with humanity, which is like incredibly based and a rare French W, in my opinion. So, like I said, November 14th, 1689 was when the lighthouse was first lit. And that same night, Winstanley was forced to become the lighthouse's first keeper. So, what happened is this guy had to light dozens of candles by himself to provide light for the lantern and operate like normally the Winstanley Lighthouse would have like 3 or 4 guys man it, but instead it was just Winstanley there. And the weather turned immediately. And so instead of the one night he planned to stay there, he was actually left stranded for 5 weeks. So he nearly ran out of food and almost made himself the world's most elaborate coffin. If we don't count the pyramids, do not think of the pyramids. So this is sounds like a good bit. Everybody watching, say, "Wow, Kyle, you're so smart. That was such a good idea. That was such a funny thing to say." And do not think about the pyramids.
God darn it, Kyle worked for the big Netanyahu. He said he don't want us thinking about the pyramids. What are they hiding under the sand?
So it wasn't until winter that they realized the waves were very rough and were getting very high. And so that the lighthouse actually had to be raised from its foundation about 40 feet in the air. And still, even with this extra 40 feet of height, when Stanley was at the lighthouse during storms, he wrote that the waves were so high and looking out the window was like being underwater. The new construction for the taller Winstanley Tower was finished in 1699, and the lighthouse was said to be beautiful, but nobody thought it was built to last. So this is a little bit of inside baseball, but as a writer, this is something we like to call foreshadowing. When Stanley and a friend had been conversing in a pub in Plymouth, when his friend told him that it was only a matter of time before the sea overtook the lighthouse. When Stanley, as overconfident as ever, reassured his friend, saying that he believed completely in the strength of his lighthouse, and quote, he should only wish to be there in the greatest storm that ever blew under the face of the heavens, that he might see what effect it would have upon the structure. Soon after, the Great Storm of 1703 hit. On the night of November 26th, 1703, an extratropical cyclone with a gale force of a Category 2 hurricane hit southern England. It is estimated that between 8 to 15,000 people were killed in the storm, and it wreaked havoc on any structure in his path. And you might guess one of those structures. Luckily for Stanley, he made it to his lighthouse before the great storm hit. I'm sure this is gonna work out like really well. I'm sure this is gonna be a great idea. The next morning, the storm had moved on, and the residents of the village of Ramhead crawled out from their homes to see the damage the storm had done. When the residents looked out to the shore, they saw the lighthouse was completely gone. All of the tower's occupants, and even the debris, was never found. So, strangely enough, on the same night, 200 miles away, and if you speak European, that's like a lot of kilometers, there was a peculiar discovery found at Winstanley's Essex home, where Winstanley, he had made a scale model of his lighthouse because he loved his lighthouse so much. It was so, he thought it was the coolest thing since sliced bread, or if it's, I guess this time period, maybe instead of sliced bread, it's like indoor plumbing. But Winstanley, he had a scale model of his lighthouse in his home. And that same night as the storm, and the same night that the lighthouse was destroyed, in the same storm, for whatever reason, Winstanley's model of his great lighthouse was found smashed on the ground. And nobody knows why. It just, in the middle of the night, it just fell over. Coincidentally, at the same time, the real lighthouse fell over. Strange. People are strange when you're a stranger. I don't think I can sing. You guys think I can sing? With the Winstanley Tower destroyed, it took 3 years for a new lighthouse to be constructed. This new lighthouse was called Rudyard's Tower, named after its architect, John Rudyard. This lighthouse has a wooden interior skeleton and a smooth stone exterior. and was much more serviceable and sturdy, but less whimsical than its predecessor. This improved construction led to the lighthouse standing for 49 years until the fire. On the night of December 2nd, 1755, a rogue spark from one of the lantern's candles lit the roof of the wooden structure on fire. The roof of the lighthouse was made of lead, and the years of soot from the lantern candles that coated the roof also caught fire. They really loved lead back then. They put lead in everything. There were 3 wickies at the lighthouse that night, but only one was left on duty. A 94-year-old wickie named Henry Hall. Yes, 94. And that's 94 in 1755, which is like 150 years old now. However, this man was blessed by the gods and seemed to have maintained his youth. Hall noticed the fire while doing his nightly rounds, and after seeing the flames, he threw open the trapdoor that sealed off the top of the lighthouse from the rest of the tower. This led to the outside winds entering the tower and stoking the fire even more. So Henry went to wake up the other wickies, and to try to put out the fire, he stood at the bottom of the lighthouse. He threw buckets of water up in the air over his head to the burning roof. This did not work very well. The fire only grew hotter, and it started to melt the soft lead beams, which is crazy because I didn't think George Bush was around in 1755. When Hall looked up at the fire to check its progress, molten globs of lead fell down from the roof and onto his skin, and one of them landed in Hall's mouth. The 94-year-old keeper recalled feeling the molten lead travel down his throat, and he screamed out to the other wickies, "My God, I'm on fire inside." This is insane. Like, if this wasn't recorded, this would be like legend. Like, this is crazy. This is very hard to believe, but it happened. At this point, the keepers realized that they were fighting a losing battle and left the lighthouse. Because, yes, even after swallowing molten lead, the 94-year-old keeper was still trying to put out the fire. So the wickies abandoned the lighthouse and ran outside to like what little land was on the Eddystone and managed to find a kind of covered area under the rocks where they could hide from the fire. They were there for hours. So these 3 men, again, one of them a 94-year-old man who just swallowed molten lead and inhaled who knows how much smoke, they sat under the stone for hours to avoid the falling debris, until a man named Mr. Edwards saw the fire from shore and got in his boat to go help them. At this point, the fire had been burning for 8 hours by the time Edwards arrived. But just to make things even worse, the surf that night was too rough for the boat to get close. So the crew had been spending hours under this rock until some guy finally sees them, probably rows his little dinghy boat out like 14 kilometers to in rough surf. And after 8 hours, only finding out now that, hey, he can't even save us. Like, he can't get close enough. Absolutely insane. What the crew on the boat decided to do was they would try to throw a rope to the shore and drag the keepers through the water. Something similar. Think of a lifeguard like throwing a life preserver. That's essentially what they did. Just instead of doing that in the ocean, they did this in a place that has riptides and razor sharp rocks that are only a few feet underwater in a storm. And one of them is a 94-year-old who just inhaled molten lead. Despite all odds, this plan worked, and all the keepers actually made it to the mainland alive. Just absolutely unbelievable. Like pure legend feeling stuff. The 3 men were taken to East Stonehouse, Plymouth for treatment. A surgeon by the name of Dr. Henry Spry came mainly to help treat Hall, who was the most damaged of any of them. In Dr. Spry's journal, he recalled a conversation he had with Hall, where Hall allegedly said, with a hoarse voice, scarce to be heard, that melted lead had ran down his throat into his body. Hall said that he was suffering from severe internal pain, which Dr. Spry didn't understand. He believed that Hall should be suffering from the burns on his skin and thought it was impossible that he could have swallowed molten lead. To him, the lead story was just the ravings of a tired and shook old man, which is like crazy. I mean, however, Dr. Spry took a page out of Dr. House's book and decided patients lie and that the molten lead story didn't happen, as the doctor really didn't find any evidence that it had, other than his hoarse voice. In the following days, Hall began to recover a bit and was able to eat and drink again. Dr. Spry observed by day 6, Hall's condition began to worsen. On Monday the 8th, 1755, Hall died in his home. Dr. Spry conducted an autopsy on Hall and found that his lower esophageal sphincter was greatly inflamed and ulcerated, as well as internal membrane of the lower part of his stomach greatly burned. In the burnt area, Dr. Spry found a large charred cavity in the lower stomach that contained a piece of lead that weighed exactly 208.47 grams. I like to imagine Dr. Spry held up that piece of lead between his forceps and sounded like Llewellyn in No Country for Old Men when he finds the money. Like, in both the disbelief and complete silence, and just has like a little, and then just goes back to what he was doing. Also, for your viewing pleasure, here's an outline of the piece of lead Dr. Spry made with the inscription, "A form of a slob of lead cut out of a man's belly, swallowed at Eddystone, December ye 4, 1755. Now, here's the actual piece of lead. The next part I don't really want to get into too much detail with because, for obvious reasons, as you'll see. So, after the autopsy, Dr. Spry wrote a paper on this incredible medical anomaly, and the turntables really turned on him. He submitted the paper to the Royal Society, and they rejected him because they didn't believe it either. Dr. Spry went on to replicate what happened to Hall in A Few Dogs and Chickens and proved that you could survive swallowing molten lead. And once Dr. Spry had tortured enough animals, the Royal Society was like, yeah, I guess you're right. On a more whimsical note, in the city center of Plymouth, there is a plaque that reads, on the 1st December 1755, fire destroyed John Rudyard's Eddystone Lighthouse. As flames reached the roof of the tower, a worker, Henry Hall, age 94, looked up and managed to swallow a blob of molten metal which lodged in his stomach. He died of lead poisoning 12 days later. So being in a fire, swallowing molten metal, and what you die from is the lead poisoning is really like a Rasputin-style death, in my opinion. Anyway, that is the story of Henry Hall and the various Eddystone lighthouses. At least the parts that I found interesting. There was a couple other iterations after of the Eddystone, but they're just really boring. I don't really want to talk at you guys about like, and then they poured concrete. You know, I can't, I can make things somewhat interesting, but like not that interesting. And then nothing happened. Nothing ever happens. So anyway, thank y'all for watching. You're the real ones. Go watch my last video, please. I beg you. Please. Oh my god. Okay, so I'll talk about it for a minute. The AI video I mentioned, if you if you watched the last video, you'd know. But the AI video, the really long thing I'm working on, it's not gonna be out still for a while because first of all I'm doing this, which is a backlog. This script I actually wrote like a year ago, and I never really got around to filming it. Actually, sorry, lie. I did film it, but the entire, like, all the footage got corrupted, and I just, like, threw in the towel. I was like, I'm not doing this again. And so this one's coming out, and similarly, I have other scripts from a year ago that are also, like, mostly finished stuff that I want to put out. Like, for example, in June, I was going to have this, like, Pride Month special talking about the death of Harvey Milk and the weirdness around that. And yeah, it wasn't a Pride Month special anymore because it just drug on so long. But now it's been a year. Now it's a Pride Month special. So eventually the AI thing will come out. Um, and like it's gonna be really long, and I feel like you need to like watch it. Like I feel like it's time sensitive. It's like especially the later parts that I haven't even got to yet. I feel like the time sensitive. Like hey, you need to do this stuff like right now to like prepare yourself for what's coming. Um, but also it has me like genuinely afraid of various powerful entities because when when you do what I'm doing, which is connecting a lot of dots that I haven't seen a lot of other people connecting, that's how you get the CIA's award for excellent journalism. So, yeah, please for that video because it might get me, schwacked. So, anyway, see you later, sailors. Why is it doing that? Why did it go dong? I don't remember. I'm trying to learn guitar for like the fifth time. So if anything sounds bad, that is just purely camera magic and problems with the audio. I'm actually Eddie Van Halen. The big Yahoo made my room hot. The big Yahoo made my room hot. Claritin, Flonase, Zyrtec, three different kind of weed. Call it Osama.